And now, a story from the Appleseed.
Let's do another, what I like to call a reupholstered folk tale. Or a newfangled fairy tale, as it were. This one is called Stabbed Tree. And it starts like this. There was once a knife that was cursed and stabbed into a tree, and no one could pull that knife out of that tree, no matter how strong they claimed to be. Here's what happened. There was once a village, and in that village lived a witch. And this witch was not like most witches are portrayed in stories. This witch was a good witch. She used her magical skills and powers to help the village. But here's what happened. People in the village heard the word witch and panicked, and they banished her from the village. They didn't ask any follow-up questions. They just heard witch, gathered, banished her, and betrayed, thrown out of her home. That witch cursed that knife and stabbed that tree, and no one could pull that knife out of that tree, no matter how strong they claimed to be. Now, that tree was very important to this village because that tree produced the world's most delicious apples. And this village was known the world over for making the world's most delicious apple pies. But when that witch cursed that knife and stabbed that tree started producing crab apples. And what's worse, ocean crab apples, which are way too salty for anybody's apple pie. And even if you are some weirdo who likes salty apple pie, shouldn't eat them from the apples from that particular tree. That tree was nowhere near the ocean. How fresh could the crab apples even be? The village panicked. They tried everything. Everybody in the village tried to pull that knife out of that tree. They started throwing money at the problem. They hired a burly lumber Patrick. His name was not Jack. He couldn't pull that knife out of that tree. They hired the most well-decorated warrior of the region. He was one level higher than a 5-star general. He was a 5-star specific. He couldn't pull that knife out of that tree. They hired a warlock to reverse the curse, and he did. He came along and he did some weird spell, and then poof, they had a giant knife with a tiny tree sticking out the side of it. And that was too weird for even tourism, so they had to pay him a second time to poof, and then it turned back into the tree with a knife sticking out of it, and then they'd run out of money. And then the village fell into disrepair. And then families started to struggle, and then people started to suffer. And generations went by, and generations went by, and generations went by, until one day, a 7-year-old girl was walking down the path that she had walked 100 times before or more. She was walking down the path, and she reached up, and for the first time in her life, she had grown just tall enough that she could reach up and wrap her hand around the handle of that knife in that tree for the first time. Now, this little girl did not know that she was the great niece of that witch who had cursed that knife and stabbed that tree. But that doesn't matter for this story. What matters is that this little girl had grown enough that she could reach up and wrap her hand around the handle of that knife. And when she did, it came out with one simple tug. Because it turns out, y'all, when the time comes, it is easier to undo things that need to get undone than we want to believe. That little girl, she reached up, pulled that knife out. And when she did, that handle expanded into eagle's talons, and the blade fanned into thousands of feathers, and this giant bird flew away with the curse. As those crab apples began falling out of that tree one by one and rolling down the hill like salty tears. Salty tears of regret or salty tears of relief. I guess it all depends upon who is telling the story.
Thanks for joining us for A Story from the Appleseed.